Ryan Matthews had everything a man could dream of: power, money, recognition, and a mansion that looked like it had leapt straight out of an architecture magazine. He lived in the heart of Los Angeles, a city built on glitz and glamour, and he knew how to use every ounce of it to his advantage. At 35, Ryan was the CEO of a thriving real estate firm that turned decaying blocks into luxury developments. Magazines called him a visionary. Investors called him a genius. And society called him lucky for having a woman like Evelyn as his wife. Evelyn was nothing like the women Ryan typically met in his world of high-stakes deals and wine-soaked galas. She was a school librarian from Portland, Oregon. They met at a charity auction in Santa Monica when Ryan was there to make a PR appearance. Evelyn had been there volunteering, wearing a simple navy blue dress and managing a table stacked with children's books. Something about her quiet grace, her eyes that looked like they saw through the glittering surface of LA life, caught Ryan off guard. She didn't flirt. She didn't try to impress him. She just asked him if he'd ever read a book that changed his life. Ryan, used to being admired for his wealth, suddenly felt small in front of a woman who cared more about stories than stocks. It was her simplicity that pulled him in, and soon he was doing things he had never done. Attending book readings, driving up to Portland just to see her, even trying vegetarian food without complaining. 6 months later, they got married in a quiet ceremony near Mount Hood, far from the noise of Ryan's usual crowd. Friends and tabloids questioned his choice. "She's not even from your world," one business partner sneered. "Exactly," Ryan had replied with a smug smile that said he was in control of this new chapter too. For a while things were calm. Evelyn moved to Los Angeles and tried to adjust. She didn't fit in at the parties where women wore diamonds the size of cherries and talked about detox juices. She stayed home, planted herbs on the balcony, and tried to find joy in solitude while Ryan disappeared for longer hours at work. She believed marriage was about patience and she had plenty of it. But Ryan had started to drift. At first it was small, missed dinners, vague answers, his phone always flipped face down. Evelyn noticed but didn't say much. She loved him and she hoped love was enough. As Ryan's company grew, so did his ego. The man who had once driven up to Oregon just to sit beside her in a bookstore now avoided eye contact at breakfast. He became dismissive, cold, and calculated, treating Evelyn like a decorative piece that no longer matched his designer life. His friends began to mock her openly and Ryan never defended her. He had become intoxicated by the speed of his success, blind to the woman who had once grounded him. And then came the night everything shattered. It was a Wednesday in late September. Evelyn had cooked his favorite, grilled salmon with lemon rice, the recipe she'd learned from his late mother. He came home at midnight, drunk, wearing cologne that wasn't hers. She didn't scream or cry. She simply asked, "Do you love her?" He didn't answer. He just walked past her, tossed his blazer on the couch and muttered, "You never belonged in this life." Those 6 words hit harder than any betrayal. Evelyn quietly packed her bag that night. As she zipped it shut, he stood at the doorway and said, "I'll have my lawyer send you the papers. Don't make this messy." And just like that she was gone. Ryan told the world she left him. That she couldn't handle his success. That she wanted a quiet life and he respected that. He paid off media sources to keep his name clean and resumed his glamorous lifestyle. New women, new parties, new investments. His life looked shinier than ever from the outside. But behind the luxury cars and high-rise penthouses, something had shifted. Evelyn had taken something with her the night she left, and he had no idea just how deeply it would cost him. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. The apartment Evelyn found in Sacramento was nothing like the sleek penthouse she had left behind in Los Angeles. It was a second-floor walk-up with creaky stairs and a stubborn kitchen tap that always leaked, but it had 2 windows that let in the morning sun and a view of a quiet street where children played after school. She rented it without a second thought, signing the lease with the little savings she had secretly kept from her days working as a librarian. She hadn't taken $1 from Ryan, not even when his lawyers offered her a generous settlement for a clean, silent divorce. She tore the offer letter in half and mailed it back. There was no price for dignity and she'd already paid enough for loving him. Life didn't slow down to comfort her. Within weeks of leaving Ryan, Evelyn discovered she was pregnant. She sat in the cramped bathroom of her apartment, staring at the 2 pink lines on the test as her heart thudded like a warning bell. She didn't cry. She didn't panic. She simply stood up, looked at herself in the mirror and whispered, "You're not alone anymore." It was the beginning of a new life, not the one she had planned, but the one that gave her purpose when everything else had crumbled. She took on part-time work at a second-hand bookstore and then added weekend shifts at a coffee shop downtown. Her days were long, her feet often ached, and her growing belly made it harder to keep up. But she never complained. Every dollar earned was folded carefully into a drawer she labeled, "Tomorrow." She read parenting blogs late at night and learned how to sew baby clothes from YouTube videos. She didn't tell anyone about the twins, not even the old neighbor Mrs. Langley, who sometimes left homemade cookies by her door and reminded her of her grandmother. Evelyn knew the world was too quick to judge a woman starting over, and she wasn't ready to answer questions she didn't owe anyone. Ryan, on the other hand, barely noticed her absence. His days were a blur of conferences, red carpet events, and interviews where he flashed his signature smirk and praised himself as a self-made man. He dated women who were all versions of the same image, tall, polished, hungry for attention. But none of them knew how he took his coffee or why he hated the sound of ticking clocks. None of them sat with him in silence when he was overwhelmed or reminded him to call his sister on her birthday. Evelyn's name was erased from his mouth and, eventually, from his memory. Or so he thought. As months passed, Evelyn gave birth to twins, two tiny, identical boys with blue eyes that mirrored Ryan's but carried a softness he had long forgotten. She named them Noah and Finn, names chosen for their quiet strength. She brought them home from the hospital in a taxi, cradling them with hands that were tired but steady. That night, she sat on her second-hand couch, fed them one by one, and promised aloud, "You'll never know what it means to be unwanted." Raising them alone was not easy. There were nights she fell asleep with one baby on her chest and the other in a crib beside her, only to wake up an hour later for another feeding. The crying was relentless, the bills kept stacking, and her body ached in ways she hadn't imagined. But there was joy too, first smiles, tiny fingers wrapping around hers, the way they giggled in their sleep. She documented everything in a worn-out journal, page after page of motherhood and healing, each entry ending with the same words, "We're getting stronger." One evening 2 years after the twins were born, she stood at the park near her apartment and watched them run toward her with jelly-stained cheeks and wild laughter. A woman nearby asked if they were hers and smiled when Evelyn said yes. "They look just like their father," the woman said casually. Evelyn only nodded and looked away. She never spoke his name. Not once. But she hadn't forgotten. She followed the news. She saw his face in magazines and billboards. She knew about the lawsuits against his company, the rumors of misused funds, the interviews where he laughed off every accusation. She watched silently as the empire he'd built began to shake. But she wasn't interested in revenge, at least not yet. She was waiting, watching, and preparing. Because Evelyn had a secret, one Ryan didn't know, one that wasn't just about the twins. It was something she had discovered shortly after leaving him, something hidden in a forgotten file on his old laptop, which she had once borrowed to complete a job application and never returned. At first she thought it was nothing. But the more she read, the more she realized what she was holding was explosive: contracts, emails, forged signatures, money moved through illegal channels. Things that could bury him if revealed. She didn't use it. Not then. She kept it locked away in a box beneath the floorboard of her closet, next to the first photos of the twins and a silver locket he once gave her on their first anniversary. She told herself she would only ever open that box if he gave her a reason, if he ever crossed the line again. And deep down she knew the day would come. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. The summer heat in Sacramento had a way of making everything feel slower, heavier. Evelyn stood on the porch of her apartment complex, watching Noah and Finn splash around in the small plastic pool she'd set up in the shade. Their laughter filled the courtyard, innocent and unbothered by the weight of the world. But her mind was elsewhere. She had just received a letter, a formal invitation to a real estate conference in San Diego. It was a big event, one where Ryan Matthews was scheduled to speak as a guest of honor. What struck her most wasn't his name, which still had a way of stirring something sharp inside her. It was the sender. Harper & Griggs, the legal consulting firm that had been involved in her divorce proceedings, the very same firm where she'd once delivered coffee as an intern back in college. The letter wasn't sent to her by accident. It was signed by Julia Griggs herself, now a senior partner, who had added a handwritten note. "I think you'll want to be there. J." Evelyn hadn't spoken to Julia in years, but they had crossed paths more than once during her time in Los Angeles. Julia had always been sharp, intuitive, and not easily impressed by men like Ryan. She had once told Evelyn, "People like him build glass towers, but they forget glass shatters." Now, sitting on her worn-out couch, that memory flickered like a warning light. Evelyn didn't make rash decisions anymore. She had 2 boys to think about. But something about the letter felt like a nudge from fate. That night, after putting the twins to bed, she dug out the old laptop, the one she had kept all these years, untouched except for the hidden folder she had discovered. The files were still there, locked behind a password Ryan had once used for everything, the name of his childhood dog, Oakley. She opened the folder and scrolled through the documents. Falsified zoning permits, manipulated property appraisals, emails between Ryan and a shell company registered under an alias she traced back to his accountant. She didn't understand all the legal jargon, but she understood enough. If this information got into the right hands, Ryan could lose more than his company. He could lose everything. For 6 years, Evelyn had chosen silence. Not out of fear, but because she wanted to rebuild her life on her own terms. But now, with Julia reaching out and Ryan still thriving in the public eye, she began to wonder, was it time to speak? The decision haunted her as she drove to San Diego the next weekend. She left the boys with Mrs. Langley, who had practically become their grandmother, and promised to be back in 2 days. The road stretched ahead like a path she couldn't turn away from. The conference was held at a luxury hotel near the Gaslamp Quarter, the kind of place where Evelyn had once been made to feel small. But now, walking through the marble lobby in her simple navy blazer and flats, she felt oddly calm. She wasn't here to impress anyone. She wasn't here to beg or explain. She was here to watch. Ryan's panel was scheduled for 2 p.m. The ballroom was packed with developers, investors, and media personnel. When he walked in, dressed in a sharp charcoal suit, the room buzzed with energy. He hadn't changed much, still tall, confident, charming in that polished way that fooled people who didn't know what lay beneath. He took the stage like he owned it, speaking about innovation in real estate and sustainable developments. But Evelyn saw it, the faint twitch in his jaw when someone mentioned market ethics, the way his hands gripped the podium a second too long. He was nervous. Something had cracked. After the session, she caught sight of Julia near the back. They made eye contact and Julia gave a quick nod. They didn't speak there. Too many eyes. Instead, they met later that evening in a quiet corner of the hotel lounge. Julia looked older, sharper, but her eyes held the same fire. "I've been watching him," she said without pleasantries. "He's under federal investigation, but nothing has stuck yet. He's good at hiding his tracks. But if you still have what I think you do—" "I do," Evelyn said, cutting her off. "And I've kept it safe." Julia leaned forward. "This isn't about revenge anymore. It's about justice. People have lost money, land, homes. What you have could bring him down, but only if you're ready for what comes after." Evelyn took a slow breath. "I didn't come here to destroy him. I came to protect my son's future. If he crumbles, it won't be because I wanted to hurt him, it'll be because he built everything on lies." They spoke for hours, mapping out a plan. Evelyn would provide the files anonymously through a secure channel. Julia's firm would coordinate with authorities. Evelyn's identity would remain protected, for now. She didn't want headlines or interviews. She just wanted peace. Before leaving the hotel, she saw Ryan again, walking out of the bar with a woman half his age clinging to his arm. He didn't see her. But she saw everything. The forced smile, the empty laugh, the hollow look in his eyes when no one was watching. She felt no hatred, just pity. He had kicked her out like she was nothing, but she had walked away with everything that mattered. Driving back to Sacramento, Evelyn felt the weight on her shoulders start to lift. She had made her choice. The truth was no longer buried. And somewhere down the line, Ryan would face what he had tried so hard to outrun. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. It rained heavily that evening in Sacramento, the kind of persistent downpour that blurred streetlights and soaked the sidewalks in silver reflections. Evelyn sat by the window, the laptop open in front of her, watching droplets race each other down the glass as her fingers hovered over the keyboard. The encrypted folder was ready. She had double-checked everything: financial records, email exchanges, internal memos, and copies of wire transfers linked to shell companies. She had renamed and organized them with painstaking care, ensuring there was no traceable path back to her. The plan was to send it all to Julia's secure server, one click away from putting years of silence to rest. And yet she hesitated. Not because she doubted Ryan's guilt, but because she understood the storm that would follow once this was done. She glanced at the boys playing in the living room, their identical brown curls bouncing as they tumbled across the floor, pretending to be superheroes. To them, the world was simple, good versus evil with no gray lines. But Evelyn had lived in those gray lines for far too long. The moment she hit send, everything would change. She might never be able to hide from her past again. She would have to answer questions, maybe even face him. But if she didn't act now, how many more families would he deceive? How many more lives would he ruin while hiding behind charm and business suits? With a deep breath, she pressed the button and watched the file disappear into the cloud. It was done. The following week, Julia called from San Diego. "They've reviewed everything," she said. "The case is moving forward. They'll be discreet for now, but Evelyn, this is going to make waves. Are you ready for that?" Evelyn wasn't sure if anyone could ever truly be ready for their past to collide with their present. But she nodded. "Let them come," she replied. Across the country in Chicago, Ryan sat in a sleek corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. He was reviewing final figures for his latest downtown development when his phone buzzed. It was Martin Wells, his longtime attorney. "We need to talk," Martin said, his voice unusually tight. Ryan sighed. "Can it wait? I'm about to meet with investors." But Martin was firm. "This isn't a routine call. There's something going on. Something big. Someone submitted documents to the Federal Audit Board. Documents with your name on them." Ryan felt the first real flicker of panic in years. "What kind of documents?" Martin hesitated. "The kind that doesn't just suggest fraud, it proves it. We're looking at potential investigations into embezzlement, false accounting, and a long list of zoning violations." Ryan's world began to tilt. He hadn't been this blindsided since Evelyn. It hit him like a cold gust of wind. Could she have done this? But she had disappeared, vanished 6 years ago without a word. Even if she found something, how could she have connected the dots? He dismissed the thought as paranoia. Still, he canceled his meeting and flew back to California within 24 hours. From his luxury condo in San Francisco, he made a call to a private investigator he hadn't used in years. "Find her," he said. "I don't care where she is or what she's doing. Find Evelyn Monroe." Meanwhile, Evelyn returned to work the following Monday at a small local design firm where she helped realtors stage homes. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and gave her the flexibility to care for the boys. Her boss, Candace, had been kind to her ever since she joined. No questions about her past, just respect for her work. But that day, as Evelyn walked into the office, she noticed 2 men standing in the reception area. One of them turned toward her with a practiced smile. "Miss Monroe?" he asked. She froze. "Who's asking?" The man pulled out a card. "David Henson, Federal Investigations Unit. We'd like to ask you a few questions regarding some files that were recently submitted in a corporate fraud case." Evelyn nodded slowly, heart thudding. "Can it wait until I finish my shift?" The man exchanged a glance with his partner. "We'll be quick," he said. They spoke in Candace's office behind a closed door. Evelyn kept her answers clear but minimal. She admitted she had once been married to Ryan Matthews and that she had found certain files by chance after the divorce. But she didn't elaborate on how long she'd known or why she waited to release the information. "My only concern was doing the right thing," she said calmly. The agents nodded, thanked her and left, but the ripple had begun. By that weekend, whispers had started to spread among Ryan's associates. Investors were pulling out quietly, and board members were requesting emergency meetings. A leak in the media confirmed the federal audit. One article in particular caught Ryan's attention. A blog post under an anonymous name that detailed not just the financial misdeeds but the personal betrayal of a woman who had once loved and trusted a man who saw her as disposable. Ryan read the words over and over, unable to look away. He hadn't thought about Evelyn in years. Not really. She was a closed chapter, a mistake he had filed away and forgotten. But now she wasn't just a memory, she was a threat. A voice. A woman who had nothing left to lose. He poured himself a drink and stared out the window, suddenly feeling very alone at the top. The empire he had built with smoke and mirrors was beginning to crumble, and somewhere out there, the woman he had once thrown out was holding the match. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. The first official headlines broke late on a Friday night. Matthews' development under federal scrutiny, read the bold letters across the Sacramento Gazette's homepage. Within hours, major outlets like the Wall Street Journal and NBC picked it up. Ryan Matthews, once the rising star of California's luxury real estate boom, was suddenly facing allegations of fraud, bribery, and zoning violations that could dismantle his entire empire. While Ryan paced restlessly in his penthouse, fielding desperate calls from shaken board members and nervous investors, Evelyn sat on the porch of her modest 2-bedroom home in Roseville, sipping tea with Julia, her closest friend and the only person who had known the full truth from the beginning. The weight she had carried for so long was finally shifting. Not gone, but no longer hers alone to bear. Julia scrolled through her phone, reading updates aloud. "They've frozen his accounts tied to 2 offshore firms." "You were right, Evelyn. The names matched the ones from those email chains. This is going to blow up. Evelyn didn't smile. She wasn't doing this for revenge. She had long passed the point of needing validation. This was about closure. And maybe, if justice found its way, about protecting others who might have been caught in Ryan's carefully constructed web of lies. But even as she tried to remain calm, she couldn't help but glance through the living room window, where her sons, Luke and Mason, sat drawing spaceships and laughing. They were 6 now, bright, curious, and unaware of the man whose name they carried. She hadn't told them about Ryan. Not really. They only knew he was a bad man Mommy used to know. It wouldn't stay that simple for long. By Monday morning, the media swarmed outside Matthew's development in downtown San Francisco. Camera crews camped outside the entrance, catching shots of panicked employees and suited executives refusing to comment. Ryan tried to hold it together. In front of the cameras he smiled, denied the allegations, and called the whole thing a misunderstanding exaggerated by the press. But inside he was unraveling. He had never anticipated that someone would get close enough to uncover the truth. Especially not her. What he didn't know yet, but would soon learn, was that his fall from grace had just begun. A week later, Evelyn received a certified letter. A legal document requesting a deposition. Ryan's legal team wanted her to appear in court for questioning. It didn't surprise her. She had prepared for this. Julia helped her arrange legal counsel through a nonprofit that specialized in whistleblower protections. Her lawyer, a sharp but kind woman named Dana Whitlow, met with her in a quiet cafe outside downtown. Dana had already reviewed everything Evelyn submitted. "You did everything by the book," she said, folding her hands on the table. "You've got nothing to be afraid of. But just so you know, he's going to try to flip the narrative. He'll paint you as a bitter ex-wife looking for attention." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "Let him. I'm not here to play victim. I'm just here to tell the truth." That same day Ryan finally received a name. The anonymous source behind the leaked documents had been identified. It wasn't just some corporate mole. It was Evelyn, his ex-wife. The one he had kicked out 6 years ago with nothing but a suitcase and a warning to stay gone. He sat at his desk for hours, staring at her name on the screen. Part of him was furious, no, livid, that she had dared to resurface and throw a wrench into everything. But another part of him, buried beneath layers of arrogance and self-importance, felt something else. Shame. Because deep down he knew she hadn't lied. Everything she exposed, every piece of evidence, he had done it. And she had known, had watched, had waited. And now, with nothing left to lose, she had brought it all crashing down. When Evelyn walked into the deposition room at the federal building in San Francisco, she felt the tension like static in the air. Ryan was already seated at the long wooden table, flanked by 2 of his attorneys. His tailored suit couldn't hide the exhaustion on his face. For a moment, their eyes met, years of history compressed into a single glance. Then she looked away and sat down beside Dana. The questioning began. Ryan's team tried to rattle her with implications, subtle insults, and accusations of bias. But Evelyn remained calm. Every answer was clear, composed, and grounded in facts. Dana backed her expertly, shutting down every attempt to derail the deposition. By the end, it was clear who held the credibility in the room. Not the millionaire, but the woman he had underestimated. Outside the courthouse, a small crowd had gathered. Journalists, legal observers, and even a few curious strangers snapped photos as Evelyn exited with Dana. She didn't say a word, only nodded politely and climbed into Julia's car. On the drive back to Roseville, she finally exhaled. "He looked like he'd seen a ghost," Julia remarked. Evelyn smiled faintly. Maybe he did. But beneath the surface she felt a new kind of anxiety. Things weren't over. This wasn't just about the past anymore. There were whispers that Ryan's lawyers were preparing a countersuit, possibly even looking into her custody of the twins. He wouldn't go down quietly. She knew that much. But she also knew she wasn't the same woman he had thrown out years ago. Back then she had walked away with nothing. Now she had a voice, the truth, and 2 sons worth fighting for. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. The morning after the deposition, Evelyn sat alone at the kitchen table, sipping black coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. The boys were still asleep, their backpacks ready by the door for another day at school. It was unusually quiet, but her mind buzzed louder than any city street. The weight of yesterday's confrontation with Ryan still lingered in her chest like a stone, heavy and unmoving. But it wasn't just the past that troubled her now. It was what was coming next. A letter had arrived from Ryan's attorney late the previous evening. He had filed a motion in Sacramento family court, seeking partial custody of Luke and Mason. The words punched her gut harder than any insult or legal threat ever could. For 6 years he had pretended they didn't exist. Now that his world was crumbling, he suddenly remembered them. Not out of love. Not out of guilt. But control. She showed the letter to Dana first. The attorney reviewed every line, frowning deeper with each paragraph. "He's trying to intimidate you," Dana said plainly. "This won't hold up in court, not with his history, but we need to be ready. He's playing dirty now." Evelyn knew it already. Ryan was backed into a corner, and that made him dangerous. He wasn't just the man who once ran a business empire. He was a man who refused to lose. And he didn't care who got hurt in the process. That afternoon, Evelyn picked the boys up early from school. She took them for ice cream and a walk along the American River Parkway. The air was crisp, the sky streaked with early autumn clouds. She didn't mention Ryan. Didn't explain why she was suddenly more protective, more present, more focused on every laugh and every little word they spoke. But she knew time was running short. Sooner or later they'd ask. And she had to be ready to tell them. Meanwhile, Ryan's own world had begun to shrink. His offices had gone quiet. Employees had started to resign in waves. Clients were backing out of deals. The SEC had launched a formal investigation. His name, once synonymous with success and wealth in Silicon Valley circles, was now used as a cautionary tale in legal blogs and investment newsletters. In private he spiraled. His penthouse was filled with unopened mail, half-empty whiskey bottles, and the hum of televisions playing on mute, each tuned to a different channel, none of them bearing good news. He stared at old photographs sometimes. One in particular. Evelyn back when she still smiled around him. The memory twisted inside him like a knife. She had known everything and stayed silent for years. Then, just when he thought he'd buried her existence, she came back, not only with evidence but with 2 children. His children. The revelation of the twins hadn't gone public yet. But it was only a matter of time. And that terrified Ryan more than anything. Because if the press ever got hold of it, if they learned he had denied his own blood, his reputation wouldn't just suffer, it would be obliterated. He called his new legal team late at night, barking orders and desperate strategies. "Find something on her," he snapped. "Anything. I want custody. I want control. I want silence." But Evelyn was clean. No scandals. No arrests. No debts. No bad partners. She worked 2 jobs. Paid her taxes. Raised 2 boys who were polite, healthy, and thriving. There was nothing to smear. And that, more than anything, drove Ryan mad. He had always been able to bury his problems in wealth, in silence, in deals. But not this time. Back in Roseville, Evelyn met with a child psychologist, a soft-spoken man named Dr. Keating, who helped her prepare for what might come next. If the custody hearing moves forward, the boys may be called in for evaluation. They'll ask about home life, about you, and maybe even about Ryan. She felt sick thinking about it. Luke had started asking more questions lately. About why he didn't have a dad. About the man in the picture Evelyn kept locked in a drawer. She knew she couldn't avoid the truth much longer. That night, she sat down on the floor of their bedroom, the boys on either side, and told them everything, gently, carefully, truthfully. She didn't mention courtrooms or scandals. Just that once, a long time ago, she loved someone who didn't love her the way a person should. And from that love came them. "He didn't stay," she said, brushing Mason's hair back. "But I did. And I always will." The boys were quiet for a long time. Then Luke whispered, "Is he going to take us away?" Evelyn's throat tightened. "No," she said firmly. "No one is taking you away from me." She hugged them tightly, kissed their heads, and stayed there until they fell asleep. The next morning, she stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the simple gray dress she planned to wear to the preliminary custody hearing. Her hands trembled as she put on her earrings. Not from fear but from focus. She wasn't just fighting for justice anymore. She was fighting for her sons. For the life she had built brick by brick from nothing. When she walked into the Sacramento courthouse that morning, every step echoed with the strength of a woman who had been broken once and put herself back together. She spotted Ryan across the room. His eyes met hers, and this time he looked away first. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. The courtroom felt colder than Evelyn expected. Despite the polished wooden benches, the humming fluorescents, and the quiet murmurs of attorneys flipping through files, there was a chill that crept beneath her skin. She sat beside Dana, fingers curled tightly around her own wrist to stop them from shaking. Across the room sat Ryan, dressed impeccably as always, as though the scandal hadn't drained the life from his public image. But Evelyn noticed the subtleties, the faint shadows under his eyes, the nervous tapping of his thumb against the side of his coffee cup, the tight set of his jaw when he spotted her. For a man who had once controlled rooms full of billionaires, he now looked like someone losing control by the second. The judge arrived promptly, an older woman with firm eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Dana had told her she was fair, thorough, and not easily swayed by theatrics. That gave Evelyn a little hope, though nothing about this day felt secure. Ryan's attorney went first. He painted a carefully crafted picture of a man who had made mistakes, yes, but who now wanted to be a part of his children's lives. He spoke of second chances, of Ryan's right to know his sons, of the unfortunate decision Evelyn had made to keep them hidden. It made Evelyn's blood boil, but she kept her composure. When Dana stood to counter, her voice was calm but direct. She laid out the timeline. The rejection. The silence. The years Evelyn had spent alone, supporting 2 children with no help. She submitted the letters. The DNA test. A copy of the restraining order from 6 years ago. The room went still when Dana finally added, "Mr. Miles didn't just leave Evelyn. He erased her. And now, when his reputation is bleeding, he remembers he's a father." Evelyn didn't need to speak until later. But when she did, she looked straight at the judge and spoke not like a witness or a victim, but like a mother. She told the truth plainly. About the betrayal. The night she was pushed out of his life like a stranger. The endless days working shifts at the diner and tutoring on weekends. About Luke's asthma and Mason's surgeries and how she cried alone in the emergency room more than once. He never called. Not once, she said, her voice trembling. And now he wants to act like a father because he has something to lose? I don't think that's what fatherhood is. Ryan didn't look at her while she spoke. He stared at the floor, jaw clenched, expression unreadable. The hearing ended with the judge deferring her decision until the following week. Evelyn walked out of the courthouse not knowing what would happen next, but feeling, for once, that she had told her story without fear. Outside, the air was warm and thick with late afternoon heat. Dana offered to take her out for lunch, but Evelyn declined. She just wanted to pick up her boys and go home. The boys had stayed with her neighbor, Teresa, who adored them like her own. When Evelyn walked into the living room, they jumped into her arms, shouting about some school project and asking if they could have pizza for dinner. She smiled through the exhaustion. "Sure," she said. "We've earned it." Over the next few days, the tension didn't lift. If anything, it grew heavier. Reporters had started circling again, sensing a deeper story. A former assistant of Ryan's leaked documents suggesting financial fraud, and another ex-employee claimed she had witnessed Ryan forging investor reports. The SEC confirmed the investigation was now criminal, and his assets in San Jose had been frozen. Evelyn watched the news in disbelief. The man who once stood untouchable in California tech circles was now crumbling piece by piece. Part of her felt vindicated. But another part of her worried. Cornered animals bite harder, and Ryan wasn't one to go down quietly. The night before the final hearing, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She sat in the boys' room watching them breathe, watching the rise and fall of their chests. Luke stirred and opened his eyes. "Mom," he whispered. "Are you okay?" She nodded. "Just thinking too much." He reached out and took her hand. "We're gonna be okay. Right?" She held back tears. "Yes, baby. We're gonna be okay." The next morning, the courtroom felt different. Quieter. Heavier. Ryan's attorney looked flustered, and Ryan himself had a faint bruise near his eye. Evelyn couldn't tell if it was from stress or something else. Dana leaned in. "I heard from a source at the firm. Ryan's board removed him last night. The company's filing for bankruptcy. It's all collapsing." Evelyn didn't know how to feel. Relief? Victory? But all she could think about was what it meant for the boys. The judge entered, reviewed her notes, and in a quiet but firm tone, denied Ryan's petition for custody. "Visitation may be considered in future," she added, "pending psychological evaluation and proof of stable employment. But at this time, full legal custody remains with Miss Foster." The air rushed out of Evelyn's lungs. Ryan stood but didn't say a word. He walked out of the courtroom without looking back. That afternoon, Evelyn took the boys to a small park near Folsom Lake. They didn't talk about court. They played catch, chased butterflies, and giggled like nothing had ever gone wrong. But deep down, Evelyn knew things weren't finished. Ryan might have lost today, but he wasn't finished fighting. And she would need to stay stronger than ever. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. The morning after the custody ruling, Evelyn awoke to the first full breath she had taken in weeks. The California sun filtered through the curtains of her small Sacramento apartment, casting a soft glow across the floor. In the kitchen, the boys were already awake, building towers out of cereal boxes and giggling about something only 8-year-olds would find funny. She stood in the doorway for a long time, just watching them, Luke with his wild cowlick that never laid flat, and Mason with his ever-serious face trying hard not to smile. There was peace in that moment. The kind of peace that had eluded her for 6 years. But she knew better than to let it lull her into thinking the storm was over. Later that day, Dana called with an edge in her voice. "Evelyn, check your email. Right now." Evelyn wiped her hands on a dish towel and opened her laptop, her heart already picking up speed. There it was, an anonymous tip sent to Dana's office email with no sender name but a burner Gmail account. Attached were documents, bank transfers, corporate communications, and a voice recording. Evelyn clicked play and what she heard made her knees go weak. Ryan's voice, unmistakable, coarse and commanding, giving instructions to shift company funds into offshore accounts, directing someone named Stewart to bury reports before the SEC could find them. It was more than evidence. It was a confession. Dana was already talking again. "This isn't just financial fraud anymore. If this gets out, it's jail time. And Evelyn, your name's mentioned. He didn't just erase you, he paid someone to dig into your background. If this turns public, you'll be dragged in too." It didn't feel like relief anymore. It felt like danger. Evelyn sat in silence, processing it all. She had no intention of going public. Her fight had always been about protecting her children, not revenge. But now, her silence could be mistaken for complicity. That night she barely slept. At 2 a.m., she stood on her balcony with a cup of chamomile tea, staring into the darkness. Across the street, an unfamiliar black SUV was parked, engine off, windows tinted. It had been there too long. She went inside, turned off all the lights and double-checked every lock. In the morning she took the boys to school and drove straight to Dana's office. They handed the materials over to a federal investigator later that day, under the agreement that Evelyn's name would be redacted unless absolutely necessary. She felt exposed, like stepping out into a storm with nothing to shield her. Within days the story broke. Tech tycoon Ryan Miles under federal investigation, the headlines screamed. News vans returned to her block. Reporters camped outside her building. A photo of her and the twins, taken without permission, made its way onto a gossip blog. Evelyn's phone rang constantly. Producers from talk shows, journalists from online magazines, even a woman claiming to be writing a book about power, love, and betrayal in Silicon Valley. Evelyn declined them all. She had no interest in turning her pain into entertainment. But Ryan was a different story. His PR team tried to spin the narrative, claiming he was framed, blaming a rogue employee, painting himself as the victim of corporate sabotage. It didn't work. The evidence was too overwhelming. Banks froze more of his assets. A warrant was issued for Stuart Harris, his CFO. And then just days later, Ryan vanished. He missed a court date. His phones went dark. Rumors flew that he'd fled to Canada. Others claimed he had a private villa in Costa Rica. Evelyn couldn't keep up with the speculation. All she knew was that the man who had once stood at the helm of a billion-dollar company was now a fugitive. The FBI left messages at her door, asking for any recent contact. She had nothing to offer. Not a call. Not a text. Nothing. Until the letter arrived. It was postmarked from Arizona, handwritten on plain white paper. No return address. Just her name in his scrawled writing. She opened it at the kitchen table, her hands trembling. "I never thought it would end like this," it began. "You think you know the world, Evelyn. You think you've got control. And then one mistake, one decision, and it all collapses. You think you're free of me but you're not. You never were. I'll be watching." She read it 3 times. No threats but no peace either. It was him all over again, control disguised as connection. She didn't show the boys. She handed it over to the authorities who added it to their growing file. But from that moment on, something changed in her. She stopped walking with her head down. She installed new locks. She put cameras outside her apartment. She started boxing classes at the gym near Carmichael. Not because she expected Ryan to come back, but because she refused to be powerless ever again. That weekend, Evelyn took the boys on a day trip to Lake Tahoe. They hiked a short trail, skipped stones across the water, and roasted marshmallows on a portable grill. It was simple, but for the first time in months they laughed without fear. As the boys dozed off in the car on the way home, Evelyn looked at them in the rearview mirror and whispered, "I'm never letting anyone hurt you again. Not even your father." She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if Ryan would ever be found, or if his empire would collapse completely. But she knew this: she had already survived the worst. And no matter what came next, she wasn't alone anymore. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. 3 months had passed since Ryan's disappearance, and the media frenzy had started to wane, but the damage he left behind clung to Evelyn like a second skin. Sacramento felt smaller now, like every alley whispered fragments of her past. The twins had adjusted remarkably well given the chaos. Luke still had his jokes and Mason still took life way too seriously for his age. Evelyn, on the other hand, couldn't remember the last time she slept through the night. Every sound outside her apartment, every unfamiliar knock on the door, sent her pulse racing. But despite the fear and the lingering anxiety, she was rebuilding, slowly, carefully but surely. Dana had connected her with a victims' rights advocate in San Francisco who helped her set up protections for her and the twins. Through her, Evelyn also got access to a private support group, women who had been entangled with powerful men who turned dangerous. It was in one of those meetings at a quiet community center near Twin Peaks that she met Heather. Heather had been through her own storm. Her ex-husband, once a respected city councilman, now served 15 years for corruption and domestic abuse. Heather wasn't fragile. She was steel wrapped in silk. And she taught Evelyn more than anyone else how to own her narrative without letting it destroy her. They met weekly. Sometimes they just walked through the Golden Gate Park in silence. Other times they drank bitter coffee and talked about survival, betrayal, and the strange way strength can be born from heartbreak. Then, out of nowhere, Evelyn received an invitation. A nonprofit in Los Angeles, run by women survivors of domestic manipulation and financial abuse, had heard about her case through a legal contact. They were holding a summit, closed to the public but attended by activists, lawyers and journalists who had covered high-profile whistleblower cases. They wanted Evelyn to speak. At first she refused. Public speaking had never been her thing. And she wasn't sure she wanted to stand in front of strangers and relive the worst years of her life. But Heather looked her straight in the eye and said, "Your story isn't just yours anymore. It's a map for someone else still lost in it." And so, 2 weeks later, Evelyn stood behind a wooden podium in a modest LA ballroom, clutching a folded piece of paper with trembling fingers. She scanned the audience, faces full of pain, curiosity, hope. She cleared her throat and began. "My name is Evelyn Hayes. I used to be invisible. At least, that's how my husband preferred me." As she continued, she told the story not of Ryan the millionaire or the scandal that followed, but of the woman who had once begged him to notice her, who had left in shame, who gave birth in silence, and who came back not for revenge but for truth. Her voice cracked once, maybe twice. But by the time she finished, the room was silent. And then came the applause. Not the polite kind, but the kind that rises from people who see a bit of themselves in you. That night, Evelyn stayed in a small Airbnb in West Hollywood. She couldn't sleep, not because of nerves but because, for the first time, she felt light. Like she had finally put something down she'd been carrying for far too long. When she flew back to Sacramento the next morning, she was met at the airport by the boys and Heather, who grinned wide like a proud older sister. Evelyn scooped up her twins in a hug that felt like home. But just when she thought the chapter was closing, her past crept back in. Late one night, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She nearly ignored it, but something made her answer. A deep voice on the line said, "Miss Hayes? This is Special Agent Crawford with the U.S. Marshals. We've located Ryan Miles." Evelyn didn't breathe. "He was apprehended in El Paso, trying to cross into Mexico. He's in custody now. You'll be contacted about upcoming proceedings." The call lasted less than 2 minutes. After it ended, Evelyn sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the wall. He was caught. After months of hiding, of threatening letters, of ghosting even his closest allies, he was finally in custody. She should have felt relief. Closure. But what she felt instead was a strange hollowness, like she'd prepared for a battle that suddenly disappeared. Over the next week, reporters came sniffing again. Dana managed them like a hawk, issuing press statements and denying interviews. Evelyn refused to go public again. She had said what she needed to say in LA. This wasn't about her anymore. Ryan's trial would be long and messy. Federal charges of embezzlement, obstruction, identity fraud, and conspiracy. Evelyn would be called to testify eventually, but for now she was told to live her life. The boys weren't told all the details, only that their father had broken the law and wouldn't be around for a while. Luke didn't ask questions. Mason, however, looked Evelyn straight in the eye one night and said, "I don't want to be like him. Ever." Evelyn pulled him close and whispered, You won't. You're everything he wasn't. In the quiet weeks that followed, Evelyn began looking for a new place to live. Somewhere a bit more removed from downtown Sacramento with a backyard for the boys, maybe even a dog. She found a small house in Roseville, nothing fancy but clean, safe, with lemon trees in the backyard and a sunroom that she instantly claimed as her reading corner. Moving day felt like shedding an old skin. She let the boys pick their own wall colors. Mason went with deep green and Luke picked a shade of orange so loud it gave her a headache. But she didn't mind. They were building something new. A life not haunted by a man's empire but rooted in small joys. And Evelyn? She started writing. Not a memoir, not yet, but a private journal. Late at night after the boys were asleep, she'd sit in her sunroom and put down pieces of her journey, scraps of memory, moments of fear, realizations that had only come with time. She didn't know what it would become. Maybe nothing. But it felt like another step forward. Another layer peeled back. Another truth spoken aloud. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. It had been a year since Ryan was arrested, and the whirlwind of court hearings, legal battles and media storms had finally settled into a slow, unremarkable pace. Evelyn had lived through the chaos, holding her breath as every new piece of information emerged about Ryan's crimes. His betrayal went deeper than she could have ever imagined. He had defrauded not just their family but countless others, including some of his closest business partners. The trial was lengthy, but when the verdict came down, it was swift. Ryan Miles was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. Evelyn didn't attend the sentencing. She had been through enough of his theatrics in the past. Seeing him behind bars wasn't going to change anything, so she decided to move forward. What mattered now was her boys and the life she was trying to build. Luke and Mason, despite the darkness of their early years, were blossoming into young boys with strong values and big dreams. Luke wanted to be a comedian, always cracking jokes to make his mother laugh, while Mason was quieter, more reflective, and had taken an interest in graphic design. They were her strength, and every day with them was a reminder of how far they had come. The house in Roseville was everything Evelyn had hoped for. The small, cozy home had become their sanctuary, a place of healing and rediscovery. It wasn't flashy or grand, but it felt like theirs. It was a fresh start, one that came with its own set of challenges, but Evelyn was determined to face them head-on. She had found part-time work as a freelance writer, which gave her the flexibility to stay home with the boys while still earning enough to keep their life on track. One evening, as she sat in her sunroom reflecting on the past year, she thought about everything that had happened. The heartache, the betrayal, the shame, and finally the relief. It hadn't been easy, but she had come to realize that she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. The constant weight of Ryan's presence in her life had lifted, and with it her ability to focus on the things that truly mattered. Her children, her peace, and her own growth. Evelyn had also found something unexpected in this new life, herself. In the quiet moments, in the mornings when the boys were still asleep and the house was peaceful, she began to explore her own creativity. She started writing short stories, and some of them were published in online magazines. The validation was small but significant, reminding her that she still had a voice, one that wasn't drowned out by the noise of her past. Then, out of nowhere, she received a message. It was from a woman named Jennifer, a former colleague of Ryan's from his early days at a tech company in San Francisco. Jennifer had heard about Evelyn's story and wanted to meet. At first, Evelyn hesitated. She wasn't sure what this woman wanted, perhaps to apologize on Ryan's behalf, or maybe even to dig up old wounds. But curiosity won out, and they arranged to meet for coffee at a quiet cafe near the river in downtown Sacramento. When Jennifer arrived, she was nothing like the polished, corporate figure Evelyn had imagined. She was kind, approachable, and sincere. They talked for hours, and Jennifer shared stories of how Ryan had been a mentor to her early in her career, only to turn manipulative and controlling when their business partnership turned personal. Jennifer was one of the few people who had tried to stand up to Ryan, and in doing so, she had lost her job and been blacklisted from the industry. Hearing Jennifer's story was like hearing a mirror image of her own, and for the first time, Evelyn didn't feel so alone in her experience. As they parted ways, Jennifer hugged Evelyn and whispered, "You're stronger than you know. And you're not alone." Those words stayed with Evelyn long after she returned home. She realized that, despite everything Ryan had taken from her, he hadn't won. She had emerged from the wreckage stronger, and with a greater sense of clarity about what she wanted from life. The betrayal, the heartbreak, and the years of manipulation had been difficult, but they had paved the way for something more profound: freedom. Evelyn sat down at her desk that evening, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She had a story to tell, and it wasn't about Ryan or their marriage or the pain. It was about her survival, her resilience, and the power of reclaiming her narrative. With each word, she felt lighter, more powerful, and at peace with the journey she had walked.